One pharmaceutical drug at the moment is absolutely taking the world by storm. 1 in 8 of all Americans have used or are currently using this pharmaceutical drug, with expected market caps to rise by 2 or 3-fold in the next few years by some projections, promising that this is finally the simple weight loss miracle drug. However, the more you look into this, the more you realize that this is a steep trade-off as far as managing your weight with other complications to your overall health. This is Ozempic. This is the market leader for the semaglutide market, and although weight loss is pretty much guaranteed with this drug, I feel strongly that it's kind of a band-aid for the larger problem. You know, you could argue that obesity is a symptom of a poor lifestyle, which has its other complications, and if you put a band-aid on it, which is this Ozempic, you're still cut underneath. You still have the poor lifestyle, but let's get into it. So if you don't know what this is, I'm going to explain somewhat briefly about what it actually does in the body so you can understand what the consequences are. So Ozempic is a GLP-1 agonist. So what does GLP-1 do? So when we eat food, GLP-1 is released into the blood to have a wide range of effects, a lot of which are dealing with metabolism and digestion, but the main point here we're talking about is satiety. If there's a lot of GLP-1 circulating, you feel more full, your gastric emptying slows down, which means your food piles up a bit more in the stomach and you feel full. And really any meal, particularly with carbs, can activate this GLP-1 pathway. And in this context, of course, GLP-1 is protective against overeating, which is why this drug targets GLP-1. And basically what it does is it amplifies its whole response, okay? So when you eat, you might have, say, this much GLP-1, and when you take Ozempic and you eat, you're getting, you know, this much. So you fill up a lot quicker, you have less desire to eat, and a few more things. Let's carry on. So naturally, with tampering such an important pathway, we're running into downsides, you know, kidney failure, thyroid cancer, joint pain, muscle pain, a few others like nausea, and I think there's actually a few more that people aren't really talking about enough. These ones here are old news really, but there's a few more. Now the reason I call this a trade-off is because although a lot of people might be doing this for vanity reasons, trying to be more thin, reducing this obesity is going to reduce the risk of cancers and, you know, heart disease, stroke, and other cardiovascular diseases. So there is a trade-off there. We're trading one set of risk for, you know, reduced chance of another. Some of the studies have shown it to reduce diabetes as well, but it is also a little bit risky for diabetics because it can crash your blood pressure if you don't have supervision and aren't taking the drug responsibly. And this is worsened by the fact that your kidney functioning is limited as well when taking the drug. So again, massive risks, but you know, you do get some benefits. And this really just, to me, outlines the modern human nature. We're always looking for an easier way, a way out, somewhere that we don't actually have to work for the results that we want, which is kind of what this drug is doing. Because if you don't want the downsides, but you want the upsides of, you know, what I just outlined, then you can just not take the drug and lose weight by other measures. Like literally another way to improve GLP-1 is just eat thylakoid containing vegetables, which I made a full video on. And as I said before, this is kind of putting a band-aid on the wider issue. And the reason I say that is, although we're losing weight with the use of the drug, we're not changing the lifestyle directly. And this leads me into one of the papers I have here, which is outlining the fact that it kind of might change dietary preference. One study had one group on the drug and one group off the drug, and they found quite clearly that those individuals on the drug were less likely to consume high sugar and high fat foods, which generally are high calorie density, which might contribute to the weight gain, which is why we kind of like them. Because, you know, within evolutionary psychology, we want the high calorie food so we can continue to, you know, grow and sustain ourselves. But that doesn't really serve us too well anymore because overeating is more of an issue than starvation at this point in time in human history. And although this is proven in the study and they cross-reference to other studies finding similar results that this drug will actually change preferences to lower calorie foods, I really do question if these, you know, lab-based results will translate to the actual real world, because particularly with food, it is extremely habit forming. The 4 factors of habit forming being cue, craving, response, and reward. And based on me just saying these, you can imagine how this is related to food, right? So additionally, it's very much so baked into our schedule as far as we know. We might eat certain foods at a very specific time. Maybe it's like a standard time for your dinner or your lunch, or maybe just first thing in the morning after your alarm goes off at the same time. You can see how this becomes a very strong habit that's just reinforced over time, and given that if you found yourself in poor health, this habit might have gone unchanged for, an extended period of time. So although this drug might actually reduce some of the cravings for these high-calorie foods, is it really going to change the lifestyle and the choices you're making in the supermarket when you decide what food you bring home? Are you really going to go out of your way to cook new recipes or try new things at the restaurant or go to a different restaurant? I can't say they won't, but I can't say they can. There just isn't enough evidence here. Of course, it can be hard to, do a study in the real world outside of a lab based on behavior. And of course, with anything like science, there's always going to be biases. People aren't going to admit that they are going to McDonald's 3 times a day. They're going to say, oh, I have a salad at this restaurant, even if they didn't. That's one of the things that we deal with within nutrition. Some of these studies do end up biased. Assuming these people are generally on hyper-processed diets which are higher in calorie and, easy to overeat on, which usually is quite a common cause for obesity. The thing is, if you slash this calorie total in half, you're also slashing the micronutrients if the foods are the exact same, right? And the problem here is these hyper-processed foods are already very low in micronutrient density, which means if you cut in half, we're getting, half of what we were getting before, which initially even was probably not enough. So now we're getting well below what's actually enough. So if certain people might change their habits, of course, but if they don't, they're going to end up with deficiencies rather quickly because the total micronutrient intake is just going to be so low. Another big topic here is some of the mental health issues that are associated with this. There have been so many anecdotal accounts and even news articles, massive headlines saying that depression and anxiety can just go through the roof on this drug, which is extremely problematic because that makes it even harder to make positive changes for some people. And additionally, modern society is very, very idealistic as far as health and physical figure, which means it's a common trope among the uber rich that they may have been unhappy when they had no money, and over time maybe they become super wealthy and they're miserable. And the reason is because at least when they had no money, they had hope, thinking, if I can just get wealthy, I will be happy. And I would imagine some of these people on Ozempic are falling into the same sort of trap, thinking, okay, at least if I just lose weight, I will be able to live a better life, I'll be happier. But the truth is, that's kind of all in your head. Getting in better shape isn't going to fix your relationships or your job. It's really just for yourself. And above all else, it's not guaranteed that it's going to change the relationship you have with yourself. And I worry that some of these people might be reaching this point and realizing this, but then they're afraid to get off this drug because they don't want to put on the weight again. And, now they're trying to finance this if they don't have insurance up to $1,000 a month to stay on the drug, which is taxing mental health even further. And the last point I have is, as far as exercise goes, if you remember earlier on in the video, I mentioned the fact that joint pain and muscle pain are some of the common symptoms of taking Ozempic, which, of course, how are you going to exercise, or at least enjoy exercise when you're doing this? For one, exercise is one of the biggest contributors to mental health and, also physical health. Gaining muscle mass is actually one of the biggest protectors against diabetes, which is one of the reasonings for people taking this drug, because if you've accumulated more muscle tissue, this acts as like a sink for all your blood glucose, because muscle will actually uptake glucose through movement without even needing insulin, which is one of the main problems with diabetics because they are insulin insensitive, which means the insulin doesn't really have much of an effect. The glucose just stays in the blood. And also just quality of life, right? Even if you're not exercising, you still have to move, you still have to get out of bed and get to the shower and eat your food and get to work. And doing this in pain through joint and muscle pain from the Ozempic is just going to harm your quality of life, even if you had no intention to intentionally exercise. So now these are just my observations. We don't have too much evidence as far as scientific literature goes beyond the actual interactions of the drug and the weight loss metrics and maybe some of the lab-based behavioral metrics. But because at the moment we have some research, we have some results of people being miserable and not really getting what they want. So there's a lot of gray in the middle, and I'm trying to bridge the two. And trying to fill in this gray area relies on making a few deductions as far as social science goes, which, you can't apply dogmas to. You can just only maybe assume a certain percentage of the entire population is going to follow that path that I've laid out. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Ozempic. So let me know your thoughts below, and I'll see you next time.